The Tremendous Adventure of Major Brown by G.K. Chesterton. One bright afternoon Major Brown went out for his usual after-dinner walk. The Major was a little man, very energetic and strong-looking, with a large grey head and a black moustache. Some time before, Major Brown had retired from the army, and now lived on a small pension. He had been a brave and successful soldier, but he had never liked being a military man. It was with the greatest delight that he took a small house in a quiet London street and devoted the rest of his life to growing his favorite flowers, pansies, in his little garden. As the Major was slowly walking along a narrow, empty street, he suddenly saw a most pleasant sight. A large, heavy man was pushing before him a barrow full of pansies. The Major had never seen such beautiful flowers. He came up to the man and began to talk to him. At first he wanted to buy only some of the pansies, but finally he decided to buy them all. "I'll tell you something, sir," said the man, and looked around. "If you are interested in such things, you just get onto that wall," and the man pointed to the garden wall by which they were standing. "What? On the wall?" cried the scandalized Major. He couldn't even think of doing such a fantastic thing. "The finest collection of yellow pansies in England is in that garden, sir," whispered the man with the barrow. "I'll help you up, sir." How it happened no one will ever know, but the fact is that a second after the Major was standing on the garden wall, and the next moment he forgot everything. In the very center of the garden he saw a large bed of the most beautiful yellow pansies. But it was not the beauty of the pansies that surprised him. It was something else. The pansies were arranged in gigantic capital letters which formed the sentence, "Death to Major Brown." A kindly-looking old man was watering them. Brown looked back at the road behind him. The man with the barrow had suddenly disappeared. Then he looked again at the flower bed with that terrible inscription. The evening air was so still, the garden was so quiet and beautiful. Why were these little flowers crying for his blood? Was it somebody's practical joke? But if it was a joke, it was a very expensive one. Such an arrangement must be terribly expensive. Why should anyone pour out money like water just for a joke against him? Suddenly the man watering the flowers looked up, saw the Major, and the watering can fell from his hand. "Who on earth are you?" he cried, shaking with fear. "I am Major Brown," said the officer, who was always cool in the hour of action. The old man stared at him with wide-open mouth, like some large fish. At last he said, come down here." "At your service," said the Major, and jumped down the grass beside the man. The old man turned his back and ran towards the house. The Major followed him with quick steps. They entered by the back door, a gloomy but very richly furnished house. The man stopped before a closed door and turned to the Major a face full of terror. "Go into that room," he said, "but for heaven's sake don't mention jackals." Then he threw open the door and ran back the way they had come. The Major stepped into a richly furnished room, full of red lamplight. he saw that the only person in that room was a lady sitting by the window, looking out. The Major had the finest manners in the world. "Madam," he said, bowing low, hat in his hand, "I am Major Brown." "Sit down," said the lady, but she did not turn her head. She was dressed in green, and she had bright red hair. "Why are you here?" she asked, still with her back to the Major. "I have come, madam," he said, "to know what is the matter, to know why my name is written across your garden. And the inscription is not at all friendly." "You know I must not turn round," said the lady. "Every afternoon, till 6 o'clock, I must keep my face turned to the street." The Major tried to accept the riddle without surprise. "Well," he said, "it is almost 6. At that moment the clock upon the wall began to strike the hour. At the 6th stroke the lady jumped up and turned on the Major one of the most beautiful faces he had ever seen in his life. "That makes the 3rd year I have waited," she cried. "This is an anniversary. Oh, I almost wish the frightful thing would happen once and for all." As she spoke, a sudden terrible cry filled the still evening air. It came from the pavement of the dark street. Then a voice cried out, "Major Brown, Major Brown, where does the jackal live?" "It is the end," cried the lady in green with shaking lips. "It may be death for both of us. Whenever—" But another cry from the dark street broke her speech. "Major Brown, Major Brown, how did the jackal die?" Brown threw open the door and ran out into the street. It was quite empty. Even the brave Major was a little shaken. He returned to the house, but as soon as he stepped into the room, the terrible voice came again. "Major Brown, Major Brown, where did—" Brown was in the street in a second, and he was in time to see something which at first glance froze his blood. The cries appeared to come from a head on the pavement. The next moment the head disappeared. Then the Major understood. There was a man in the cellar. He had put his head through the coal hole in the street. The Major returned to the lady. "Where is your coal cellar?" he cried. She looked at him with wild grey eyes. "You will not go down," she exclaimed, "alone into the dark hole with that beast." But the Major did not hear her. He was already in the kitchen, walking down the stairs into the coal cellar. It was quite dark in the coal cellar. As he was feeling in his pockets for matches, a pair of gigantic hands came out of the darkness and seized him by the back of his head. They bent his head down in the complete darkness. But the Major's head, though upside down, was perfectly clear. He put out one of his long, strong hands and cut the leg of his invisible enemy. He pulled it off the ground and laid the giant with a crash along the floor. The man tried to rise, but Brown was on top like a cat. They rolled over and over. It was clear that the invisible giant now wanted only to escape. But the Major held him by the coat collar and was not going to let him out of the cellar. Suddenly the giant's coat buttons burst, and, leaving his torn coat in the Major's hands, the giant ran out of the cellar. This coat was the only real clue to the mystery, for when the Major came out of the cellar, the lady, the rich furniture of the house, had disappeared. He saw only bare boards and whitewashed walls. This time the Major looked about him almost in despair. "I must go and see Rupert Grant at once," he decided. Rupert Grant was a young but very promising private detective. He lived in a small cottage with his brother Basil. Basil Grant had been a judge for a very long time. People said he was a bit off his head. Basil liked poetry and art. His blue eyes were dreamy and melancholy. Rupert was quite different from his brother. He was very attractive. He liked his detective work and was sure that someday he would become as famous as Sherlock Holmes. Rupert's restless eyes were full of excitement when the Major finished the story of his mysterious adventures. The eyes of Basil were closed as if in sleep. "The lady was in the conspiracy, of course," said Rupert. Major Brown turned very red. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I think not." Rupert raised his eyebrows, looked at him for a moment, but said nothing. When he spoke again, he asked, "Was there anything in the pockets of the coat?" "Yes," said the Major, "some small change. There was a cigarette holder and this letter." He laid it on the table. Rupert took the letter. It ran as follows: "Dear Mr. Plover, I am sorry to hear that some delay has occurred in the arrangements relating to Major Brown. Please see that he is attacked tomorrow, as we have arranged. The coal cellar, of course. Yours faithfully, P. G. Northover."